Let's jump right back into it and welcome Sasha McCune, VP of Media, Entertainment, and Culture at CMB, and Connolly, Research Manager at ESPN. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. We have a little competition with the sphere going on. We don't have home field advantage for that, huh, Caitlin?
No.
I'm Sasha McCune. I'm VP of Media, Entertainment, and Culture at CMB, a leading insights research consulting company. And
I'm Connolly. I work on the ESPN research team and really am just serving as the voice of the fan to understand their interests and behaviors.
Yep. And today we're here to talk about all things sports, media, streaming, and fandom. I don't know about you, but just fresh off the holiday season, I was cozied up with family, with lots of NFL action. Netflix dominated the day. Had some very unhappy Saints and Steelers fans in the room with me. How about you, Caitlin?
Holiday-wise, I was watching lots of football, as you as well.
Yeah.
I was, of course, cheering for my New York Giants, who aren't doing so well this year.
Yeah, so it's a really complicated space and a lot of fun here. Any fan favorites in the room for the Super Bowl?
Shout them out.
Shout them out. Lions. Anyone else? Chiefs. All right, we've gotten that out of our system. Hopefully we've got some sports fans in the room. I did pretty well on my fantasy league, but Caitlin did not fare so well. So.
Well, I'll just preface that I did receive the highest draft grade of anyone in my league, and then things went downhill pretty quickly. I think I came in just about last place, so I have high hopes for next season.
Yeah, great. So before we dive into what we have to share today, we're going to be sharing results from a study that we partnered on together earlier this year on sports fandom. We want to get your take on the state of the sports media landscape. So help us out here, scan the QR code. We want one word that you can think of to describe the state of the sports media landscape today. So I'll give you a second to go ahead and get those phones up, scan, and give us that one word to work with here. We can go ahead and start looking at the results as they come in. See what y'all have to say. Saturated, yes.
Chaotic.
Overwhelming. Oh. Crazy, fandemonium, that's a great word. Gambling has been on the rise. Love that one as well. What else?
Endless, unhinged.
Unhinged. It does feel a little unhinged. Every day is something new. Fleeting.
Chaos.
Overpaid. That's funny. Fractured and fragmented for sure. We're going to be talking a lot about the state of the very fragmented media landscape today and all the things that we're learning about how that's impacting fans. And when we stepped back and how we feel about the state of the sports media landscape, this meme came to mind. Everything is fine, but also maybe the house is on fire. There's a lot going on. It's total chaos, total pandemonium, and working at the intersection of media, culture, and fandom and entertainment, it kind of feels like this is always the case. We're always on a little bit of a traumatic roller coaster with the state of change. The only constant is change, and there's a lot of complexity in the landscape. But we wanted to understand how that was impacting fans itself. So Caitlin is going to take you back in time a little bit to some simpler times. We're going to talk a little bit about how the state of the media landscape has changed and why exactly it is so complicated today. And then we're going to share what that is doing to the sports fans and viewers who are tuning in and watching and following the games.
Great. So as we're all well aware, the way in which consumers engage with media and technology, it's dramatically changed over the years. And if we get in our time machines, go back some odd 50 years, we'd be back in the year 1970. And at that time, watching TV was really a household activity. Everyone would crowd around the same small screen in their living rooms, and what you were watching versus your neighbor down the street, your grandma all the way in Florida, everyone was watching the same thing as you at the same time. Now, fast forward to the year 2015, the ESPN research team conducted a study to better understand fans' media setups and behaviors. And at that time, traditional multi-channel was retracting at a faster rate. Netflix was really emerging more as a streaming service versus a company that sent you DVDs in the mail. And that marked this shift away from an era of stability and consistency and inspired the name of our study that year, the quote, new living room. But fast forward now, 2025, the very idea of a living room, it's been completely flipped on its head. You know, Sasha, we have new devices, streaming services, password sharing, ability to watch on the go, and emergence of new technology like AI, which makes this ecosystem even more complex. And nowadays, everyone is watching something different. I'm sure my top 10 on Netflix is very different from Sasha's. I got a lot of guilty pleasures on mine. Love is Blind, The Ultimatum. I'm always down for a good Selling Sunsets. I don't know, Sasha, what's on your?
I've been down a spy thriller path lately with Black Doves and The Agency, and I also, related, loved that Netflix documentary on the Michigan sign stealer for the sports team, so that was really interesting as well. But don't worry, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas when it comes to your guilty pleasures.
Good, love to hear that. So sports, however, remains universal. We were all just talking about how we plan to watch the Super Bowl next month, even if somehow the Eagles end up making it, which pains me to say as a Giants fan. But
as a former Philadelphian, I feel like I have to say, fly, Eagles, fly. Sorry.
Rubbing it in there. But, watching sports, it's no longer as easy as turning on your TV and navigating to maybe 1, 2 networks to find everything that you need. Now it requires this complex web of services and devices to fulfill the needs of fans today. And we can bring that to life with a few examples you see here. Let's start with the NFL. This season, fans can watch games on ABC, ESPN, CBS, Fox, NBC, NFL Network, and those can be accessed via a traditional multi-channel subscription, so cable, in some instances a broadcast antenna, or a DMVPD service like a YouTube TV, Sling TV. But that alone wouldn't get fans access to every single NFL game. This year, they also had to subscribe to 4 additional streaming services to get access to those games that were exclusive in that environment. So, you have Amazon Prime Video for Thursday Night Football, or Peacock had the opening Friday game from Brazil, or ESPN Plus had a game back in October, and we were just talking about Netflix having 2 NFL games exclusive on Christmas Day. And all of this really adds up. If fans wanted to watch every NFL game, or at least have the option to watch every NFL game, it would cost upwards of $800 to $900 for this season. NBA, very similar situation. This season, fans can watch games on networks like ESPN, ABC, Turner Sports, NBA TV, but starting next year, 2025, 2026, there'll be exclusive games on Amazon Prime and Peacock. And we see very similar scenarios for MLB and NHL. This, by the way, is all just for national games. It doesn't even consider regional sports networks that have rights to local in-market games. It also excludes any apps or social media platforms that fans are regularly tapping into to get news, highlights, information. And it's really just the tip of the iceberg. Many leagues have rights stretched across broadcast, cable, and streaming. And streaming for sports is expected to continue to grow. This year in 2025, it's projected that around 90 million Americans will stream at least one sports event once a month, which is a pretty stark increase from what it was back in 2021 at 57 million.
And when we talk about chaotic, right, that's not even taking into account all the different devices and access points that fans have to navigate in order to get to the game they want to watch. You have mobile phones, antenna TV, tablets, connected TV, laptops, gaming consoles are also a way that people are accessing their games. And there's a lot of different paths to design for. So looking at the state of this landscape, that's why it's so fragmented. The complexity and the different layers of services and platforms and devices that fans need to navigate in order to get their setup working just the right way.
Yeah, so it's definitely a web that's thread with a lot of the words you all nominated in terms of confusing, chaotic, excessive, and that sentiment is really echoed by industry headlines and research. Really points to this idea that all of this is creating a more negative fan experience. You know, we see fans are overwhelmed by the number of services and devices that they need, which can come at a pretty hefty price tag. Too many options can create confusion as to which subscriptions and packages they need, and then ultimately, once they have those services, which ones do they need to tap into to watch which games and events. It can also be a hassle having to navigate these different streaming services and platforms. You know, I think back a few months ago, I was watching a sports event and coverage started in the morning on ESPN Plus, moved into the afternoon to ESPN on cable, and then transitioned to one of the broadcast networks at the end of the day. And that can be a lot, navigating across all those different platforms, especially if you have 11 remotes. Sasha, is that right?
Oh yeah, 11 remotes.
Yeah.
We'll talk about those
we're
later.
Talk about that. But it has us wondering, how are fans adapting to all of this?
So primed by all of those headlines that Caitlin just walked through of the mess of the game and where to find it, we wanted to know ourselves, if today's landscape is so out of control, why aren't fans losing their minds? And truth be told, as researchers working in this space, sometimes we're losing our mind trying to keep up with all the changes and everything that's going on. But this premise really sparked a research question for us together as a team about needing a more up-to-date perspective of what was going on in the living rooms and homes and on the screens of our fans. We have the privilege of having a lot of access to data of how people are consuming content, but we knew that with the state of fragmentation, the messy reality of the actual paths of access was going to be a more complicated story. So we wanted to explore that patchwork of media and tech that users and viewers and fans were going through to get to their favorites. And we had some hunches about what we would see. We'll talk about those a little bit as we go as well, but we wanted to understand just how complex things had gotten, and we wanted to see the workarounds in action. So ESPN came to CMB and had this research study in mind. We collaborated on design for it, and at the end of the day, we wanted to zoom in on the sports media web and ecosystem through the eyes of avid fans. Avid fans are the ones that are subscribing to multiple platforms at a time and are viewing and engaging with the specialized platforms as well as their general entertainment streaming options. So we wanted to get that perspective of what was going on in the home, which meant going to the home as researchers, which was very exciting for us as a team to do. We went and followed 45 sports fans at home, how they were accessing the games, them documenting their setups and sharing with us what they watch, when they watch it, how they watch it. And we went into 18 homes across the US, Seattle and Dallas and Chicago, and watched games alongside people and even some of their friends and family members to see fandom in action. And we also did quantitative research alongside our in-person qualitative work to get a broader perspective on the broader state of the marketplace, and that included more of a Gen Pop fandom view. We had some light avid fans, mid-level avidity, and there was a lot going on here to uncover, so we're going to share some of the results of that today for you. But first, spoiler alert, fans were actually shockingly satisfied with their sports media ecosystem. And let me tell you, we were very surprised by this because how complex it's gotten we really thought people would be tearing their hair out and complaining more about the state of fragmentation. But at the end of the day, when we looked at the data and the numbers, 90% of our sample of our sports fans were actually satisfied with their setups. And they were even saying, 2/3 saying that sports media landscape is on the up, that it's getting better every day, and there's a lot of improvement and innovation. And we kind of had to dig and find out why some of this was going on. And even more than that, 1/3 of our sample said that their setup was a walk in the park, that it was easy and simple for them to navigate. And we were just scratching our heads. How can what you just walked through on that previous page, how can that feel easy to people? Because there's so many parts and pieces to the ecosystem for fans to juggle.
For sure.
So it was painful to watch a lot of the workarounds when we went in the home. So it's important to just think about when you go into the home, you get a really beautiful perspective of what's really going on. And we did see a lot of pain. We saw a lot of pain being tolerated in the living room, but also pain that was being ignored in many ways. And when you do in-person ethnography research, you have these really vivid memories that stick with you of participants. One of our personal favorites was Garrett in Chicago. Garrett was a master sports fan. He knew everything about every team. He knew everything about every sports commentator. He could probably have presented that slide, Caitlin, that you presented himself, because he knew who owned what, who had the rights to everything. His fandom knew no boundaries, and he was so invested in the game. But for someone who had this level of mastery of sports fandom, we watched him navigate one of the most painful streaming setups in his living room that he had just gone on to tolerate. So in the middle of him showing us his easy setup, which he said many times during the interview, we watched him endure buffering speeds that would remind you of the early 2000s from a dated smart TV device. We watched him unplug and replug multiple devices, juggling 2 phones, a tablet, and the remotes for the TV just to get things working and to switch back and forth between platforms, which he's doing all the time. And worse yet, we watched him tape his Roku to the wall to stabilize it to get a better connection.
And I think that tape was right next to
the TV. So
yeah.
when you talk about user torture and patterns, you could tell he has done this before. That tape was on standby as the savior and hero to come and help him get to the game. So Caitlin and I are in these interviews together. We would look at one another across the room, and what would we say?
We
listen and we don't judge. If anyone's in the TikTok trend, that's very much a lot of what was going on in these homes. There was pain everywhere that we were seeing. But we were also finding that these viewers and sports fans had an incredible high pain tolerance. Their love of the game and their love of the sport kind of blinded them to the complexity that they had created over time with their ecosystems, and in many ways also the complexity that had been foisted upon them by the industry. So when you do work like this, the say and do gap, it becomes really evident. People were saying that their sports systems were easy, that they were working, and they were working well for them. But we also saw that their needs were not being met. And we saw people take on these very elaborate workarounds to optimize their experience, but we were seeing that their experience wasn't actually optimized at all, which is an interesting problem for us. So Trinisha is a great example of this lack of optimization going on in the household. In many ways, self-inflicted chaos, but Trinisha had on her living room table, she had 11 remotes. And when we dug into what was going on with this pile of remotes on her counter, we found out and tested them, and there were 11 remotes and none of them worked. It had just become a collection point of dated devices, a kind of remote graveyard, if you will. But that wasn't even the only room in the house with TVs. We were kind of a little too afraid to find out if there were more remotes hiding. But she had basically been collecting these remotes and using them as to take batteries from them, and had kind of given up on juggling them. And these had been, sent to her over time with a new device and a new device, and they pile up and don't do anything for her. And she didn't want to go through the hassle of fixing it, figuring it out, or developing a universal remote solution. So she kind of just went with manual overrides on the TV. We saw this pattern over and over again in the landscape of fans encountering these problems and going through elaborate workarounds. A really fun one was when we had Anthony trying to access multiple apps on his smart TV through different ways. So he would access Hulu Live through his Xbox, he would access Paramount through Amazon, he would access another one through his Apple TV, and he was taking all of these different pathways to get to what he needed to access, and it made no sense to us why these things had been created, these pathways had been created. We also saw Garrett juggling his tablet, which he called the football tablet, and his 2 phones in his remotes at the same time, because he wanted to manage conversations about sports with multiple groups of friends all at once. So it was kind of like watching him juggle burner phones in the living room, right? It was very fun to watch. We also had Anthony that was syncing his TV and radio so that he could watch the game on ESPN, but he wanted to sync a different radio commentary for the audio to curate his experience to be the best that it could be and to get his spin instead of just the mainstream spin on the game. And Scott was another really memorable household. Scott had 3 TVs in one room, all set up side by side, each designed to simultaneously play 6 games on each television. So you have 18 screens in play at any moment in time that he had created, but he did not have a universal remote. So imagine watching him go back and forth between all of these remotes and devices to figure out how to change the audio, turn the volume up, switch a game out. It was very comical to watch.
Yeah.
And what did we say again?
We listen
and we don't judge. Adam was another favorite of ours. Who can forget Adam? Adam would, in many ways, he belongs here at CES. Maybe he's here. But he had one of the most impressive brand new projection TV setups that he was very, very proud of and wanted to show off to us. However, it was being controlled by a nearly obsolete iPhone 4 that couldn't hold a charge long enough to actually make it through a game. So we would watch him struggle to get it charged and get back into action. And we were finding this happening over and over again, and it's really surprised us because if you've ever been in the living room with a sports fan and if someone steps on the remote or interrupts the game, you know that's usually a big deal. But people were really tolerating these starts and stops and these problems because they had created them themselves. So we would find that people would go through this elaborate maze, find a solution in their home, in their setup that worked for them, and they would then just repeat that habit over and over again, even if it made no sense, and if it was overly elaborate and crazy, it worked for them, and they would kind of repeat it. So this complex maze that they were creating made a lot of sense to them. In some categories, we talk about the concept of desire paths and users creating shortcuts to make their life easier. But what really struck us in this highly fragmented media landscape is that the sports fans were not creating shortcuts for themselves. They were creating more inefficient solutions that just felt like theirs. And it kind of became patchworks of Band-Aids, Band-Aids upon Band-Aids upon Band-Aids, because of the complexity of the number of platforms and the number of devices that were at play.
So we're definitely seeing a lot of pain, a compounded pain by the change of sports rights, complex access points, and infinite hardware and compatibility challenges. But even though it felt like total chaos, we are also seeing gain, gain in the form of pride, ingenuity, and satisfaction. And one thing fans took a lot of pride in was their personalized web of services and devices that they strung together for themselves. When we went into their homes, we actually asked them to draw a map of their different services and devices that they use for both entertainment and sports content. You can actually see a few of the maps that they drew for us here. The results were really interesting, and as fans were doing this, their eyes would just light up with enthusiasm. They were weirdly eager to show us how they created a system that worked so well together to fulfill their unique habits and preferences. And one thing that really stood out to Sasha and I is no two maps were identical. We were equating them to almost like snowflakes. They're very intricate, unique, and tailored to each individual fan. And when we were in their homes, we asked them, can you explain these maps to us? So they voiced them over. And as they were doing that narration, we saw it really revealed order and not chaos. And we're just really impressed by the level of problem solving, creativity, and intentionality required. It wasn't just about getting access to the content, but it was configuring a system that worked seamlessly together. I'm sure we all listened to our Spotify Wraps at the end of last year, but before we had technology creating playlists for us, Sasha, I'm sure you remember we had to do it the old school
Standing by the
way.
radio with a tape, ready to hit record. Yep.
Yes. So growing up, I took a lot of pride in the playlist that I would make, and I had one for every mood, one for doing homework with a lot of classical music to keep my mind focused. I had one for long car rides. I think that one had a lot of Disney show tunes, which I'm sure drove my parents crazy for endless hours of karaoke in the car. I had one with more, mellow, relaxing vibes. I think there was a lot of Sheryl Crow on that one. She was one of my favorites growing up. But ultimately, this is what fans are doing. And instead of curating a playlist to fulfill a mood, they're curating devices and services to fulfill their sports fix. So Sasha nodded to this earlier, but when we surveyed fans about how well their services are fulfilling their needs, an overwhelming majority, 90% said their needs were being met. Nearly no one said their needs were not being met at all, which was pretty surprising to us about how high that figure was. We had a lot of hypotheses going into this, which were somewhat flipped on their heads. What we expected was not necessarily what we found. We thought that fans were going to be overwhelmed by the services and devices that they had, but instead we found most were juggling them quite seamlessly. We thought they'd be struggling to find content, but instead saw they had known routes and workarounds to find what they needed. We also thought that they'd be driven by simplicity, but instead they had solutions that worked for them even if they weren't the most intuitive. So one reason for this higher level of satisfaction is the current environment gives fans greater flexibility, precision, and choice in how they engage with sports. They're really put in the driver's seat so they can choose how they access sports whenever, wherever they want. They have choices as to which turns to make and what services and devices to pick up and drop off. This environment also gives fans clear direction to sports in a broadcast cable-only universe that were much harder to find. We heard that echoed by a few different fan groups, but especially the international soccer fans. And this environment also provides an on-ramp for net new sports or global competitions that in past, really just opening up fans' horizons and allowing for further opportunities for exploration. So I think, Sasha, you remember the one fan we spoke with said that they started to subscribe to a new service and as a result began following cricket, which was a sport they had spent very little time engaging with in the past. Another reason for this higher level of satisfaction is service math is not always mathing. So how fans assess the total cost of their services it's not super straightforward, and it's not usually a one line item, a bill they're paying all at once a month. Cost is really up for interpretation, and it's easily justified. So a lot of fans we spoke to said they get access to services for quote unquote free, via their tech hardware, mobile plans, apartment buildings. And when it comes to these fans, sharing is caring. They're swapping different services and passwords with friends and family. And within our survey, we asked fans, how well do you know how much you're spending on your services for sports each month? And the overwhelming majority said they had a rough idea, but when it came down to it, very few could cite an exact amount. They'd really have to jot it all down and add it all up. However, the avid fans, they were more likely to know exactly how much they spent. They also had a higher willingness to spend with additional room before they hit that threshold. So Sasha, we were talking about who's benefiting in this environment, and it is really the avid fans. They're most motivated to find what they need because sports is part of their identity. We also see avid fans, they're more likely to be active users. So they're consistently evaluating their different services and devices throughout the year and making modifications. We also see active users, they're more likely to be younger. And in general, fans are adding more and subtracting less. And this dynamic, it was even more pronounced with avid fans as they added 0.5 net new services in the last year. So as a result, they have a pretty expansive portfolio. On average, avids had access to 7.6 services, of which they were using more than half, 4.2 for sports alone. So fans' maps, they've served them pretty well in navigating the current media environment, but there are some mixed opinions as to what the future of sports media will bring.
Yeah, and we asked our sports fans what the future held and got a lot of different opinions. While we saw earlier there was a number, about 2/3 being very optimistic about the state of sports media, there wasn't actually a lot of agreement on what that future looked like. So there were folks like Kevin who were convinced that the sports media landscape was going to get even more balkanized, messy, exploded, more fractured in the future. And in some ways, even though he acknowledges how chaotic that is, he can't imagine it making sense for all of his sports to be served under one app. He can't picture that working well for him based on the way that he's approached his needs. Kevin also, by the way, was paying twice for Paramount Plus because he did not realize that he was paying for it through Amazon as well as paying for another duplicate subscription as a standalone. So, we had to ask ourselves, is fragmentation really working in Kevin's favor? Maybe not, but he didn't even know. He couldn't even see that he was making this duplicate subscription, although we noticed for sure. Then you have others like Yasmin and Naj and Anthony that felt like there has to be a point where we get to more consolidation, more simplification, that companies need to start teaming up together. And Yasmin lamented this, that it was in many ways like going back to cable, but a lot of sports fans see that pendulum is already swinging back and that more simplification is good for the household. In families like this, there's a lot going on. There's a lot of entertainment needs beyond sports. And Yasmin and Anthony really liked the idea that they could have everything in one place, in one package, in a bundle that could meet individual family needs, and family members could customize as needed to meet what they wanted to watch when they wanted to watch it. So this leaves us with two very different futures to design for, which doesn't help in this already highly fragmented media landscape that we all live in today. So how do we continue to improve on the fan experience of the future? It's constantly changing and constantly evolving, and there's a lot of exciting things the ESPN team is working on at a market level. But Caitlin, do you want to share some of the high-level patterns of need that we saw come out of this research?
Yeah, definitely. So the current streaming environment offers this highly personalized experience that consumers just find very appealing. And if you think about it, entertainment content shifted to streaming well before sports. And as a result, these services are really setting the standard and expectation for high levels of personalization. When we surveyed fans about entertainment content, the majority said they're watching titles based on what's recommended for them and what's trending. So this offers a big opportunity for sports in the streaming space to offer this similarly highly personalized experience. Though we acknowledge that the sports library, it's largely driven by live events. So when it comes to personalization, yes, we can provide a curated selection of content based on past consumption habits, but it's also about integrating stats, information, analysis around fans' favorite teams, their players, their fantasy leagues so they don't come in last like me this year, or the bets that they've placed on for sports to really elevate their experience. And beyond personalization, services can also add value by offering paths of optionality. So there were some fans that we spoke to who wanted access to as much content as possible. And we like to equate these fans to those who enjoy dining at the Cheesecake Factory where, you know, the menu is vast, overflowing with choices. The appeal for them is really to engage with whatever they want, whenever they want. Now, other fans we spoke with preferred a more curated selection of sports content. These were the fans we said enjoyed dining at a local restaurant with maybe a more limited menu, but one that has thoughtfully crafted specials. So they really like a selection that closely aligns with their tastes. And luckily, in the streaming space, there's ways for us to cater to both types of fans. On one hand, we can give fans as much content as they want by combining sports with entertainment. So we're really attracting those give me more fans. On the other hand, we can focus on providing fans with really just the sports content that they truly care about. So offering a sports-specific service to appeal to those give me less fans.
So as an industry, we clearly need some better collaboration to meet the needs of folks that are looking for that simplification, some streamlining, things coming together. But as you just heard from Caitlin, personalization and optionality lead straight to more fragmentation as well. So we're left designing for all of these different futures at the same time. So bringing the game to fans and making it a better experience is going to take a lot of work from everyone in the room together. So everyone kind of has a role to play there. So we like to talk about this as innovation in sports media needs to be a team sport. As we think about what that looks like and what that means, we need that personalization. We need to help fans get to the game faster. We need to think about all the different devices that play a role in the ecosystem, those streaming devices, the smart TVs themselves, all the ways that things are being projected and played in the living room. And we need to make those things more compatible and update them and inspire people to update them. And we need to think about the sports experience in the design of these devices that are a part of the ecosystem, which I'm sure lots of people here at CES have much to do about. And when we're also thinking about this, we like to go, what can we do to make Garrett's life easier? What can we do to help Adam and his beautiful projector that is in desperate need of a new iPhone? Someone just needs to send him a new iPhone, a dedicated iPhone, and just label it projector iPhone so that he can have an updated experience. But these are all things that we're thinking about as we move the experience forward. Caitlin and I are pretty convinced that the media ecosystem is not getting any less complicated. It's just getting more complicated from here, but we need to work together as an industry to make sure we're thinking about the sports fan experience as a part of these ecosystems of products and experiences.
So thank you all for being good sports here and joining us today.
Pun intended. Thank you. We hope that this has inspired your teams to think about the impact of fragmentation in the living room, which is all what we're here to solve today. And if you're interested in learning more about the research that our team does at the forefront of consumer adoption of AI and other categories and devices. Go ahead and scan this, get in touch. We have some really great work to share that's public as well. And thank you to all our ESPN fans out there, and stay tuned for a really exciting year of drama, product launches, new news, all the great things.
Thank you.